let's see, today is the 24th. It's the birthday of the Gregorian calendar. You might not have known that. I didn't until I heard it this morning on the radio. So yeah, they went back and they actually looked at fur trapping records from French-Canadian fur trappers in the 1700s up through the 1900s. And you can get, I mean, is it the same as counting actual live animals? No. But it's a pretty good proxy. You know, you can guess that in a year when they killed a lot more lynxes, there probably were a lot more lynxes. And they did some, manipulation and basically got estimates of population for both lynxes and snowshoe hares. So one more way you can sample populations. Okay, so we know populations fluctuate. We know that density independent and density dependent factors really drive those fluctuations. The perils of small population. So those beautiful cats are what? Cheetahs. Cheetahs, fastest animals on Earth over a short span of time. You can't outrun a cheetah, but you can run a cheetah to death. If you can escape a cheetah in the initial few seconds, they tire out very quickly. They are sprinters, not distance runners. Humans are actually distance runners. Humans are pretty awesome distance runners in the animal world. And it's probably one of the things that led to our early success as hunters is essentially, who are my cross-country people in here? Or track distance people? Nobody? Huh, it's so funny how they pile up. I have a bunch of cross-country people in one class this year. Humans, it has been said, early human hunter-gatherers probably had a lot of success from just literally running animals to death because not a lot of animals are built to cover the kind of distances we are. There aren't a whole lot of animals that can run for 26 miles. Humans do it. It's miserable from what I hear. That's a marathon. But there are not a whole lot of... Horses are an exception. Horses can run longer distances than humans. But most animals tire out and will actually collapse if you run them that far. So, but anyway, this is a cheetah. That was totally off topic. Cheetahs have had historically very small populations. They went through a period where they got down to like 7 or 8 individuals on the entire planet. Do you remember what that's called? A genetic... Ooh, look, can I fit something into this neck of this bottle? It's a genetic bottleneck. Yeah. They went through a genetic bottleneck, and even coming out of that genetic bottleneck, they've had fairly small populations, and they've been threatened by a lot of factors. But when you have a really small population, you tend to see inbreeding. They're incredibly vulnerable to any kind of environmental disturbance. They're not widespread. There aren't many of them. So if something shakes up their habitat, they're kind of toast. And the thing with inbreeding, and we kind of referenced this when we were looking at that video from Crash Course where it talked about Darwin noticing that in his family you had lots of infertility, short lifespans, hereditary disease. Inbred individuals do tend to have decreased genetic variability. And as a result, they tend to be more susceptible to all sorts of things. And they tend, on average, to have shorter lifespans. So small populations tend to get hit with all of those limiting factors harder than large populations. Larger populations tend to be more robust. So limiting factors aren't going to hit them as hard. Lifestyles and human population growth. So... modern humans have been on this planet, and when we say modern humans, we mean the species Homo sapien. These are folks who share all the same numbers of chromosomes and a lot of genes with you, though there are certainly some differences between a modern human 100,000 years ago and you in all your glorious modern humanness. So from early on, human populations, that was fantastic, human populations, the earliest ones, I'll take that right over here, were hunter-gatherers. So hunter-gatherers do guess what? They hunt and gather. I know, it's really creative naming on the part of anthropologists. And it's estimated that hunter-gatherer populations take in, I think they usually say about 75% of their calories from which activity do you think? Hunting or gathering?
I think gathering.
Gathering, yeah. They tend to get fewer of their calories from meat, from things they kill, and a lot more actually from roots and edible plants that are gathered in season. Hunter-gatherer cultures have typically high mortality rates. Food availability is down to what you can find, when you can find it. Just as in things like wolf packs, dogs and wolves in the wild are very well known for what's called gorge and starve behavior. When there is food, you eat so much you can no longer move. You know, wolves on an elk kill or a moose or some other large prey will eat themselves so full that their bellies are bloated and they can barely run. And then they may go a week without a meal. Gorge and starve. There's some evidence that in some hunter-gatherer populations, you have similar sort of phasic calorie intake, where you have a really good season, you have a couple really good kills, you have an abundance of food, and then you have much leaner times. Not quite the extreme of like going for weeks without a meal, but you have a lot of calories come in at once, and then you have much lower caloric intake. That's hard, especially on little kids and babies. Babies are somewhat sort of buffeted from that by breastfeeding because their mothers provide a steady supply of calories. But in hunter-gatherer populations, you also don't see vaccination against childhood disease. You don't see protections from all the things that used to kill babies. You also in I used to say when my daughter cried, when any baby cries, I say, yeah, you should pick the baby up. We are all the offspring of babies who cried when they were put down. Because do you know what happened to babies who didn't cry when they were put down? They got eaten by saber-toothed somethings. You put a baby down, they cry. Otherwise, they got eaten by something. So these cultures tend to have very high mortality rates. When all the humans on the planet are hunting and gathering, the carrying capacity of the planet for human populations is pretty low. Who here, and I think I have a guess, I'm going to say it's about 25% of the classroom, has eaten something that they have killed? Okay. Or something somebody in their family has killed? Okay. Good, more than 25%. Excellent. If you had to depend entirely for all your meat for the year on things that you had killed, if we waved a magic wand and everybody in Columbiana County was depending entirely for their calories from meat on things they had killed, what would happen to the deer population? We would wipe them out. We could eat ourselves out of venison probably in a year or two. Then, if that was the only source of calories for humans, our population would start to drop. Who here has ever eaten a plant that they or somebody in their family has gathered in the wild? Not grown in a garden, but gathered in the wild. Awesome. What'd you eat? Raspberries. Okay, wild berry picking. Okay, wild berry picking. What else? Berry picking. Anybody ever eat nettles? Oh, I love nettles. Oh, they're the best in the spring. Oh. You have to cook them. You don't want to eat them raw. You have to cook them. What about burdock root? Anybody ever eat burdock root? Dandelion root? Dandelion greens? Wild mustard? Really? Oh, there's a whole smorgasbord out there. But I have to admit, on the other hand, I'm kind of glad that you guys aren't in competition with me because I like to eat my way through nature. I spent a very happy semester eating my way through field botany. Me and my best friend. We had a wild edibles book we kept in our backpack, and we ate everything we could find. If we were all in competition for the dandelions and the burdock and the nettles, what would happen? We would wipe them out. There are too many of us for the environment to support hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherer carrying capacities are much lower. And then, about 10,000 years ago, humans did this interesting thing. And I know you guys study hunter-gatherers and agricultural revolution in freshman social studies, correct? You talk about that there? Okay. So about 10,000 years ago, and what was interesting is this was about 10,000 years ago all over the planet at the same time. Weird. Aliens, yeah, came and conferred this upon us. Humans began to domesticate animals. Now, what's interesting is that there was already good evidence that we had one domesticated species under our belt. Can you guess what that was? What was the first animal domesticated by humans? Dogs, yeah. Dog-human relationship goes back about 20,000 years, so it predates agriculture because dogs are great hunting companions. So about 10,000 years ago, though, we start cultivating plants. So, okay, I love eating nettles in the spring. I have patiently, carefully, tenderly nurtured a little patch of nettles behind my barn. My dad used to laugh that I was the only person he knew who would say, "Ooh, the nettles are coming on very nicely this year." And he's like, "They're a weed." They're delicious. Well, I got a great idea a few years ago. I let some of them go to seed, and I gathered up those seeds, and I went and planted more nettles. So, oh my gosh, I could have 2 nettle patches. Yes! That is the beginning of agriculture. We take a plant in the wild that we like, and we say, hey, I could plant this near where I live. I don't have to go travel to the nettle patch. I can bring the nettle patch to me. I can go dig up that raspberry bush that I go and harvest from every year, and I can plant it right outside my door. And then I know where the raspberries are. I don't have to travel to them. This also allowed us to select varieties. It allowed us to do selective breeding. And suddenly we could grow a whole lot more food in the same amount of space. Rather than looking for that scattered raspberry bush, we can make a whole field of neat rows of raspberries. Rather than, randomly picking some wild grains that are good for crushing into flour, we can make a whole field of grain. And human carrying capacity, if we look at hunter-gatherer, it's down here, human carrying capacity grows. And with the advent of agriculture, carrying capacity is actually higher. We can feed more people. Now, when the carrying capacity is higher, guess what? Human populations begin to grow. The other part of that, so this is a modern human. You can see he's got a cut-off T-shirt and a ball cap. Heck, that could be Mrs. Dolentz's husband, because he has some horse-drawn implements. He does a little part of their farm with horses. So that's a modern human using horse-powered agriculture. But what you need to understand, and I got some really nice photos I found here, is that at one time, all agriculture was powered entirely by human muscle. So do you remember in Rat Attack watching, I can't remember the farmer's name, but the farmer and his wife, the little tiny subsistence farmers, how did they separate the rice from the rice plants? Whack, 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 whack. Yeah, literally beating it into a basket. All agriculture was powered by human muscles and human calories, and in some parts of the world it still is. This is somewhere, I think, in Indonesia. This is, I think, someplace in Africa. So this is actually just an experimental, it's a farm someplace where they're doing a demonstration project. Hey, can we harvest this wheat by hand? And they are. Even in Amish communities, typically they're using horse-drawn equipment, which is a step up from early agriculture. I mean, when we say early agriculture was all hand-powered, like literally entire villages worth of people going out into the fields. Here's a nice image. Going out into the fields, every single one of them, oh, except the aristocracy, we can see they're not working, but all the peasants out every day. That was life. Wake up, go to the fields, come back from the fields, go to bed. Not a whole lot to it. So the other piece of that population growth is that in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, having a lot more mouths is just more people to find food for. In this sort of early agricultural thing, what do more kids mean? They mean more hands to work. And if you look at, like, it's sort of a standard expression, oh, big farm family. In the 1800s and the 1900s, my grandpa was one of 10. His father was one of 17 born, I think 11 or 12 of whom survived to adulthood. That wasn't uncommon. If you ask your if you have great-grandparents alive, if you have grandparents alive who you know, or just people who are in their 70s and up, the odds are pretty good they're from a family of more than 5. Many families were much larger. And part of that was hands to work. You needed all those hands to do work. So once we have the ability to grow more food, our carrying capacity goes up, our population growth goes up. And then one more thing happens. The Industrial Revolution. So there's this little blip, and we'll look at a picture of human population growth from prehistory to present. So other than this little blip where a quarter of the population of Europe died with festering boils in their armpits and groin, doesn't it sound delightful? Bubonic plague. We have the Industrial Revolution. So 1780 is given as the start, 1770, 1800. So we shift to starting to use machinery. And we're able to burn fossil fuels. We start burning coal. Oil comes much later. Gas comes much later. There are also some notable improvements in hygiene. So, we're not quite at the point of flush toilets yet. We're not at the point of vaccinations yet. But we are at the point of confining wastes to privies, to sewers. I mean, they're open sewers, mind you, in the cities, literally a ditch with fecal matter in it. Like, it's a ditch full of crap. People are still flinging their fecal matter from their little night pot under the bed out into the street, into the ditch in the morning. But hey, it's in a ditch. It's not just in the street, so that's nice. I know this doesn't sound like an improvement in hygiene to us, but it actually is. And we start to see, the first primitive sewer systems. We start to actually have somewhat better health care. And we start to have people who are able to get more calories. More calories, in this case, leads to better nutrition. You're healthier. You're better able to resist disease. The other thing is we now have mechanized agriculture. So we're not quite to here yet. I mean, we're not talking about industrial combines where one person in the combine and one person driving the truck can harvest as much grain as probably 100 people did in a day pre-industrial agriculture. But we are starting to see improvements in farming due to industry as well. And I thought I had a picture here of an early thresher, early industrial agriculture. So guess what? We had hunter-gatherers carrying capacity. We have agricultural carrying capacity. We have the Industrial Revolution, and carrying capacity goes up again. We can grow more food. We can grow more food on the same amount of land. We can put more people. Not everybody has to be involved in agriculture. People can move to cities and work in factories and produce goods and produce machines that will then make other things easier. So population goes up again. So carrying capacity definitely goes up. Does it go up to here? We don't know yet. We don't know yet. This is, here's hunter-gatherer cultures. We start to see agriculture. Well, I guess agriculture is really, let's see. I guess that's agriculture. So that's when we start to see that shift. It starts to climb. And then Industrial Revolution starts here, basically. And we start to see a real spike in human populations. What kind of growth is that? Exponential. It's J-curve growth. Interesting. Okay, so developed countries versus developing countries. You live in a developed country. Most of Western Europe is considered developed. The U.S., Canada, Russia, Germany, Australia, France, England, those are all developed countries. We tend to use lots of resources. We got all the lights on. We're running the dryer. We're not doing much anything by hand. We have good health care. Most of you are probably vaccinated against a whole host of diseases. If you get sick, we have antibiotics to treat you. If you break something, you have a modern hospital that can take care of you. If you have a heart attack, there are drugs to address it. There are modern treatments and interventions to address it. We have good health care. We tend to have longer life expectancies. People in the U.S., what did we say average life expectancy for a male was? 76? Somebody looked it up for me. 76, 75, what? 74? Okay, 76.4. Okay, mid-70s. So, a male can expect to live to be in his mid-70s. Females can commonly expect to live into their late 70s. Life's pretty good. Developed countries make up about 20% of the world's population. We use 75% of the world's resources. Just get your head around that for a second. Who here has siblings? Okay, who they live with, who they have to share stuff with. Siblings have to share stuff, right? This is what happens. So if you had 4 siblings, there were 5 of you, you would be 20% of your family, of your sibling group. What if out of 5 siblings, 1 sibling ate 75% of the cookies, of the popcorn, of the bacon, of the fill in the blank? Would you want to club them over the head every now and then? Would you want to kick them in the shins? I would. Don't mess with my cookies, dude. It's not fair. Globally, developed countries are 20% of the population. We use 75% of the resources. 75% of the oil and the gas, the coal. Coal may be changing. Coal use is on the decline in the U.S. And a lot of the industrial world. It's on the rise in China and India, but it has been said that if everybody on the planet lived the way people in the developed world did, we would need something like 7 or 8 Earths annually. We would need 7 planets. We don't have 7 planets, so that's an issue. So in developing countries, now one thing, we used to call these first world and third world. Are you familiar with those terms? Like, oh, we're a first world country, that's a third world country. We don't do that anymore. We say developing, which kind of assumes that at some point, all of these countries will be where we are in terms of resource use. From a global resource perspective, that ain't good. There literally isn't enough for everybody to use the way we do. So these tend to be areas that have lower per capita incomes. These are the places where you hear, people survive on $1 a day all year. There may not be a lot of cash. You still see things like subsistence farming like we did in Mizoram. These also tend to be areas that have higher rates of population growth. People have more children in the developing world. We don't see a lot of people here who are like one of 10 siblings. I would be shocked if any of you were one of 10. And I know I've got at least one person who I think is a larger family. But like these days in the U.S., 5 kids is crazy. I have a cousin who has six girls, ranging in age, oh gosh, I think the oldest is like 22 now. So they're like 12 to 22, and they had 6 kids. And everybody's like, oh, I can't believe you had 6 kids. They had 6 kids. That's unusually large for a family in the developed world. We have lots of families of 2 and 3. We have lots of families of 1 kid. Our average birth rate in the U.S. is 1.3, which means the average U.S. family has fewer than 2 children, if we average them all out. So 2 is pretty common. In the developing world, larger families are the norm. Less access to health care, which also means less ability for women to not have children they don't want to. They tend to see higher rates of population growth. They tend to see higher poverty. They tend to see shorter life expectancies. They tend to not have access to the kind of health care, including vaccinations, that we have. So more people are born, but more people die young. And this is 80% of the world. 80% of the world does not live like you and I. At 80% of the world uses 25% of the fossil fuels on the planet. So it's a pretty stark difference. It's actually a very stark difference. So let's look again real quickly at that. Do you think that this rate of, now this is a global rate of growth. That J-curve is over the whole globe. Do you think that in this country we're experiencing this kind of growth? No, we're not. The average family is 1.3 kids. How many people does it take to replace 2 parents? 2. 2 is replacement. If you and one partner have 2 children, you have just replaced yourselves. At some point, you will shuffle off this mortal coil. We all do. And your 2 kids, if each of them find one partner and have 2 kids, have just replaced themselves. At 1.3, are we replacing ourselves? No. If there was no immigration to the U.S., what would our population numbers be doing? Declining. Same is true for most of Western Europe. In most industrialized nations, birth rates are at a point where without immigration to boost population, we literally are losing population. The younger part of our population, because our birth rates are down far enough, the working age part of our population is shrinking more rapidly. We have a lot of people at the upper end of population right now. We have that baby boom chunk. They're retiring. So without bringing in humans from someplace else, we literally don't have enough people doing active work. That's pretty common in the industrialized nation. Now, do you think in the developing countries where we have higher population growth, do you think they're closer to J-curve? Yeah, and actually I found a fantastic site from a biologist who had done this, and I liked this. He looked at separating developed and less developed countries' growth rates. So if you take all, and I don't know what data he put in, so I can pretty much guess he's using US, England, Germany, France, Canada. I'm not sure who all he's counting as more developed. Does Mexico count as more developed? Parts of Mexico are very modern, very developed. Parts of it are very not developed at all. What all is he counting here? We don't know. But it shows a pretty low growth rate. Just over 1, which means still growing. Well, the rate here flattens out to pretty much no growth. In the developing world, that growth rate is still pretty steep. So there's still a much higher rate of growth. So what did we say generally happens in a system that experiences J-curve growth? Boom. So that's the scary part. Here's the good news part. Yay, there's good news part. There are a lot of ecologists and people who study human population growth who are saying we're probably not going to see that kind of major crash. But, and I have seen a few sources that say 2050 is a year to watch. You'll all be alive then. You'll be in the prime of your adult lives at that point. You'll probably be middle-aged at that point. Let's see, how old will you be in 2050? You'll be 50. Yeah. Yeah, pretty weird, huh? Oh, gosh, you guys were all born right around the turn of the century. You're turn of the century babies. I forgot. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, okay, 2050, you'll be about, yeah, it makes the math easy for you. You'll be middle-aged, solidly middle-aged. What I've seen a few sources discuss is that there are a lot of projections that say starting around 2050, human population growth will probably start to level off. And we'll probably approach carrying capacity. And there are people who are saying that carrying capacity is probably 12 to 13 billion, which sounds insane to me. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of mouths to feed. It's a lot of calories required. But that's one projection that I saw echoed in a few different places. Does that happen? Or does this happen? We don't know. It's unlikely that humans will be wiped off the face of the planet. We're an incredibly resilient species. We seem to figure our way out of just about any mess, which is kind of cool. We've made a lot of those messes ourselves and then had to figure our way out of them. We used to think it was a great idea to dispose of raw sewage into rivers. Yay! Ew, I know. Never mind the fact that somebody else was drinking that river water downstream. I'm sorry, I know, it's right before lunch. But we do seem to find a lot of we engineer our way out of a lot of issues. So, could this happen? Yeah, it could. Could we see population? When do density-dependent limiting factors start to really kick in? As you approach what? As you approach carrying capacity. So, down here, if there's a big dip in population, is that due to any kind of density-dependent factors? No. Disease, the Black Plague, wiped out a quarter of the population. It didn't really matter how densely packed they were. As we get up here is where we start to see those density-dependent factors kick in. So when they talk about, the future involving wars over food and water, that's where that starts to happen. And that's probably in your adult lives. Now, given that, are you safer in a developed nation than a developing nation? Yeah, you have a lot more cushion between you and starvation than people in developing nations do. You're very lucky to live where you do. And at this moment in time, it's pretty amazing. But it's all about calories. It's all about resources, and humans aren't exempt from that. We have lots of cushions between us and, a rabbit or a coyote or a wolf does not have a lot of a cushion. They find calories or they don't. They starve or they live. Their babies starve or they live. We have a lot more cushioning, which is nice. We've built that for ourselves because we are a rather clever little species, capable of amazing things. So, okay. Study guide is on that corner. It's also online. You do it, you don't do it. It's up to you, but, it only helps you.